And now, please welcome cybersecurity reporter Politico, Maggie Miller.
Hello, my name is Maggie Miller. I'm a cybersecurity reporter for Politico, and welcome to your last session of the day. I like to think that we have saved the best for last today because we're going to be talking on this panel about the big buzzwords right now in the cybersecurity space. Artificial intelligence. I feel like you can't go anywhere, at least from a reporting standpoint, without talking about that and the various risks and the potential that comes with this quickly evolving space. And so, with that introduction, with no further ado, I want to bring out our panelists. Let's welcome them. All right. Well, thank you again for being here today. I think we have a really good lineup of speakers and excited to delve into a variety of topics. And we're going to kick this off with a question that I'm first going to direct towards Chris DeRusha, who is our Federal Chief Information Security Officer and the Deputy National Cyber Director, and also to Trisha Kothari, the CEO of Unit 21. I want to ask you both if there are various cybersecurity risks for different forms of AI that we should be focused on. And this is a very broad question because it is such an evolving area. So maybe, Chris, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. So I think the way I'd answer that is there's a couple ways to unpack it. First, obviously, the applications of AI are going to be crucial to answer that question. So if you look at things like automotive, making health decisions, making financial decisions, clearly the same risks that are going to be present in all of these models are, those applications we're going to have more concern and view them as higher risk. I think that's why you look at what we're doing in the administration right now is we've been trying to get a handle on all of the AI use cases across the very vast federal government. And in part, that's because we're trying to get a handle on, what are people doing today? Should they be doing that? And, where we're going to move from there as we work on developing our own guidelines and guidance for federal agencies. So I think that's like one way of looking at it. But, certainly there's some types of risk that we see common across. If you think about one that we're highly focused on, data poisoning. So really you're getting into data integrity issues. So I think kind of no matter what application you're looking at, as you go and pull these data sets, a lot of times there isn't a chain of custody there that you can then understand the full integrity of the data, and that can lead to bias, discrimination, just bad decision making using it. So that's just something that we kind of are looking at across, and you can look at other types of risks, access risks, where a lot of the same things that we've seen for years on other types of software are still going to be present here. So it is a broad question, but I guess that's sort of where I would start and lay the foundation.
Absolutely. Trisha?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the things that we are seeing increase a lot is the sophistication of the social engineering scams. We work today with a lot of financial institutions to identify fraud. And what we're seeing is things like, the Nigerian Prince email is a thing of the past. The spelling mistakes, grammatical errors, it's not that common anymore. And the level, the breadth, and the sophistication of the social engineering attacks is a lot more significant. And we see that across all of our financial institutions that we work with, where the biggest vector of scam is account takeovers, where the user knowingly or unknowingly got into a scam situation. And so that's where I feel the biggest issue is going to be is the fraudster is going to have this tool which is available for them that can enable them to conduct these levels of attack at a much more deeper level than in the past.
And I'm going to direct this next question at our other two panelists, Dmitri Alperovitch, the executive chairman at the Silverado Policy Accelerator and a member of our Cyber Safety Review Board, along with Phil Venables, the chief information security officer for Google Cloud. Are there any specific sectors for either of you that are more at risk for cybersecurity threats through the use of AI technologies? And are certain sectors more prone to AI development and security issues versus others? Maybe Phil, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely the right question because I think, as most of you will appreciate, there's, when you look at AI in itself, it's kind of meaningless to think about the risk without putting it in a context. And then when you look at all of the different critical infrastructure sectors and use cases, that you're putting in AI into a financial system or into a healthcare system or into a certain type of government system or a defense application, just, think about the full spectrum of things. The risk of the AI is the context of the risk in which it's deployed, and then how it's being managed in the context of that system. And I think the other interesting thing to remember, and I guess this audience more than most that we speak to about this will understand this, is while things like generative AI is relatively new, although not as new as people kind of sometimes talk about, the AI in the field of managing decisions, managing risks, managing transactions, coming up with decision support systems, AI in the field of cyber is, again, nothing new. This is like a decade old. Many of our organizations have been using AI for great benefit, but the risks definitely come specific to the situation. And I'm sure as the panel progresses, we'll explore a lot more detail around that. But this is one of the reasons why it's so important for the security teams in organizations to partner with the risk teams, the model validation teams, the trust and safety teams, the compliance teams, the lawyers. Some organizations, like us now, even have ethicists that think about how you're going to tune policies in response to, ethical obligations. And so I think, again, I'd think the risks come in the context, and every different sector is going to have different risks because of what can happen and the consequences associated with something going wrong with AI.
Dmitri?
Well, I serve, as you mentioned, on the Cyber Safety Review Board, actually with Chris DeRusha and a number of other federal government officials and private sector partners like Heather Atkins from Google. And we just completed a review of the lapses and affiliated groups, which are basically these hackers, teenagers mostly. They're in various countries, including the United States, UK, Brazil, and others. And the reason we looked at this group is because these hackers that are without really deep technical skills are incredibly effective at breaking into virtually every large technology and other Fortune 500 companies. I'm talking about Microsoft, Uber, Twilio, NVIDIA, you name it. They've all suffered breaches from this group. And there's one thing that this group is really, really good at. They don't use malware. They don't use exploits. They don't exploit vulnerabilities. What they do is really incredible social engineering, oftentimes via phone, where they actually call up the IT help desks at these companies, talk their way into resetting credentials for employees, get a two-factor authentication sent to their phone, which they clone from a legitimate employee by doing SIM swapping attacks. And using those techniques are incredibly effective. And very few companies have been able to actually stop attacks from these groups when they're really determined to get in. And when we looked at this group and we looked at why they're successful, in large part is because they had native English language skills, the ability to talk on the phone, sound very credible, and not make mistakes that you would have from a foreign actor, for example, that may not know the culture, may not know the language very well. And this is the one area, as Trisha had mentioned, that the AI is going to just completely revolutionize, because both on voice, on video, on text, you now have access to technology that's going to be available to pretty much anyone, whether it's a Nigerian scammer or a Russian intelligence operative, and they're going to be able to leverage those types of techniques. So that's, I think, one of the big problems for really every sector, that you're dealing with the biggest vulnerability, which is your own employees, that can be with a good enough lure can be taken in and gotten to do all sorts of things that can compromise the security of our organization. And that's just like a really fundamentally difficult problem to solve, right? There's no technical solution to it.
And virtually every sector right now is exploring the use of AI technologies, but this becomes especially tricky with some of the more regulated sectors, such as the financial and healthcare sectors. So I'll start with you, Trisha, and then I'll open it up to the wider panel to discuss this. But what are some of the challenges or opportunities of the use of AI in, say, the financial sector and more regulated areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, as Phil mentioned, AI is not new. It is generative AI, and at least mainstream usage is maybe 9 months old. But AI has been used by the financial services industry for a long time. The sophistication and the scams it's so interesting, and the fraudsters are going to be the first ones who are going to be exploiting this. We already have a bunch of companies that we work with where they have voice simulations that their customers receive saying that that their child or their niece or nephew is in trouble and needs to be sent money, and they send that money over, and obviously it's a scam. So this is a really very dangerous place that we're going to enter into, and it's important we use our best tools. In the financial services industry, the concern is from a fraud and a money laundering perspective. You are regulated. The regulators are going to come knocking at your door and ask you to explain what you are doing. And the black box machine learning models of 8 on 10, 9 on 10, accept or reject this transaction just doesn't work. So the explainability becomes a really big core foundation of how to detect whether your individual end user or business is being subject to a potential fraudulent activity.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because I think, in some ways, the deployment of AI inside highly critical industries that are also some of the most regulated industries, is a note for caution. But at the same time, the good thing about that is, to your point, they've historically been regulated about not specifically the use of AI, but the use of models in general. And so there's quite a high degree of culture in, and I think the same goes for pharmaceuticals and some types of healthcare environment, where you've got a culture of how to manage the collection of data used for training of models, for how to think about how you would do the explainability, the testing, the validation, independent teams to kind of stress test the behavior of models. Not to say that they aren't all having to adapt pretty quickly to accommodate new forms of AI that come with subtly different risks. I think the other thing when we look at this is we're working with customers across many sectors. Some of the most important things is how you deploy the AI inside a control system. Because as you think about it, you deploy, let's pretend an application for a bank that has a chatbot on the website. And we all know the interaction with the chatbots on bank websites have historically been awful. And the first thing you do is type, put me through to a person, as quickly as possible. Now they're actually quite functional, the ones that have deployed generative AI. But the risk of that, of course, is that they're based on some of the foundation models. And if you don't constrain them and you don't manage the input and output well, then you could get all sorts of interesting behavior if you're doing prompt engineering style attacks. And one of the big concerns, of course, that you have to test for is, providing something the right prompts to a model that has API connections into your back-end systems that can move money around. Clearly is an environment where you want input and output guards and circuit breakers and guards into how all the systems construct themselves. So while there's a lot of focus on the AI itself, which I think is right, on the risks and the testing, also thinking how you build the control framework that surrounds the deployment of these things is just as important.
Dmitri, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at federal government, I don't know the exact number, but we have over 30, federal regulators. And so if you just kind of look at the challenge of data use, storage, there's lots of requirements around that today, and they're disparate at times. And so I think as we move forward here, we have to really ensure that we learn some good lessons from the cyber end, where we've got a lot of different patchworks and frameworks and requirements that can be disparate at times. And I just think that we really want to ensure that in regulated industries, government, others, healthcare, finance we're talking about, that we have a common approach here to the safeguards we're putting in place, right? Because I just think it'll be challenging to unpack if we kind of keep the approach we've had before of everybody independently going out and doing that. So I think it's going to be really important as a opportunity for us.
Is the answer to have 60?
The answer is not to have 60.
I want to talk a little bit about secure by design and building that into these new AI products that are coming on the market. So, what do not only developers of AI products, but also industries need to know about this? And what more education needs to be done to ensure that security is being thought about from the ground up as we move into this new AI age? And I'm going to direct that first to Phil and then, Chris or anyone else who wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I'm always kind of hesitant to answer this because it'll feel like a sales pitch, but I'm going to be unashamed about this because we've invested a lot in building a lot of the controls and technology of this. So, at the risk of stating the obvious, this is quite a sophisticated space. So how you think about training models, how you think about constructing models so they're not subject to extraction and exfiltration, so the data sets are managed so that you're not at risk of poisoning the model. So you're constructing a model. So for a particular application, you can actually derive some explainability in the use of the model, the surrounding contract. These are tremendously sophisticated problems that takes people with a lot of expertise in how to think about the training, management, development, testing, and safety of AI systems. And not many organizations have that capability. And in fact, there's some arguably some AI companies that claim to be AI companies that don't have that expertise either. So, so caveat emptor when you're working with an AI company to think about, do they have that end-to-end data governance framework? Do they have the testing apparatus? Do they have a platform you can take that you can then take a foundation model, train your data on top of it without there being a risk that that data flows back into the company's foundation model, that there could be a leak to another use of that? All of that requires a huge amount of engineering and control and investment in the platform itself. And so I think a big part of the secure by design, secure by default is really on the onus on the platform vendors of AI tooling that other enterprises will use. And then in addition to how you all make use of that platform and, and stay within the guardrails, you still, to be clear, there's no magic here. You still have to implement a high degree of control and testing on top of the features provided by the platform. But I think all of us need to have very high expectations on the platform providers to build that control in. And then the other thing, expectation, which I'm pleased to say is happening, that the AI companies working with each other to share information about attacks, about threats, about risks, about new research happening to provide collective protection for the deployment of AI is something that's absolutely vital. And again, whichever company you're working with or whichever kind of open source community providing an open model that you're working with, think about, are they tapped into that community? Are they providing a foundational platform for you to operate safely with your business goal on AI? And is that company serving that kind of secure by default platform driven orientation? And we'd love for you to pick us, but whoever you pick, make sure they're doing that full secure by design, secure by default platform, because it's really, really important in this space.
If I can add something controversial to the discussion, the biggest problem we face with these generative AI systems right now is the error rate. A lot of these systems have upwards of 10% error rates, forced or unforced, whether it's hallucinations, where they're constantly telling you the absolutely wrong thing to an answer, or where a user of that system can get it to reveal information that the system is not supposed to give you, private information or information that could be detrimental to society, like give me a virus like COVID that has lethality that is much greater, for example, or tell me how to build a dirty bomb or the like. And right now, this is the controversial part. We don't have a way of systematically addressing those issues in the community, because right now we're sort of trying to patch it individually of, well, let's prevent it from answering this way. Let's figure out how to get it to not hallucinate on this issue. And that just fundamentally cannot scale. And we need a better approach to how to identify errors, how to drive the error rate down in those systems than we've been able to figure out. Now, we're still very early on in this whole evolution. So I'm confident that we'll come up with these scenarios. The challenge is that we're deploying these systems in the real world while the error rate is still way too high. And yet it may not matter when you're playing around with ChatGPT or Google's version of it, but when you start embedding it in critical processes where you may have life or death situations that may arise, you're going to have real issues. And we got to get a handle on this.
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern. And I think the good news is it's made easier to manage in the context of a business deploying it in a very constrained way where they've tuned the model to have groundedness to data, but it's absolutely a focus for people. And it's actually kind of a bit of a kind of a warning for all of us is, if you take some generic on the web consumer product that's not designed for the critical use in your business and then just jam it into a critical process, then, that's not going to be a great outcome. So.
Yeah, I mean, I had a few things. I mean, I appreciated Phil's comments about secure by design, secure by default, particularly with the large cloud security providers. I mean, that's a underpinning key pillar of the national cyber strategy that we just put out, that the most resourced need to be doing that, need to be doing more. But I think there's an open source community here. There's a lot at play, and driving the cybersecurity community and secure by design principles and philosophy and just knowledge into the AI developer community is going to be crucial. One thing that we're sort of excited about that we launched out at the administration launched out at Black Hat that'll be run by DARPA is the AI Cyber Challenge. And what that is opportunities for folks to use AI to go after code, and they're going to find some interesting stuff. And I think that creative approaches like that, where you're bringing these communities together and you're saying, hey, AI community, look how scary it is actually by going out and deploying it. And now can you help fix it? Because that's what we're talking about. And more things like that that are hands-on, real, exciting to be involved in, I think are good educational opportunities to start bringing these communities together.
And I don't know, Trisha, if you had any thoughts before we moved on?
Yeah, what we really advise our engineering team is whenever we want to leverage bar ChatGPT-esque things, it needs to be in the constrained environment where we're not sending customer data. And so I think that is really important because there will be mistakes made. There are humans ultimately at play, and companies need to do a better job to protect the end customer data here.
And, I spend a lot of time covering Capitol Hill, covering the federal government, and it does feel like you can't go anywhere at the Capitol these days without talking about AI. I mean, as we speak, the Senate Intelligence Committee is hosting a hearing on AI. There were, I think, at least 3 hearings on the subject last week. And of course, the White House has secured voluntary agreements with leading AI companies on secure and safe use of AI. So with all that as the backdrop, do you think that Congress and the White House are moving fast enough to tackle this issue? And, where do we go from here on the federal side? And, Chris, I'm going to start with you on this, but I think, any other panelists can weigh in as well.
All right. Well, I appreciate you starting with me. We'll see where this question goes. I'm actually interested to see where it goes. Look, I feel like we're doing an appropriate amount. There's a lot one can do here, and this is, in my world at least, the number one issue where I sit in the White House and people are focused on IT issues. And you can see that with the leadership being exhibited out of the West Wing on a daily basis. And you can see that exhibited in the fact that it was the president who got 15 commitments from top AI companies, right? And the vice president has gotten commitments. And they've both held meetings and convened meetings here in DC on the West Coast. So I think, for those who are not insiders in government, when you have the top 2 officials, in administration forward on an issue, you're doing a lot because that means there's a lot of activity below it. And it's true, in the White House and all the agencies, there's really nobody who doesn't have a strong equity at play here. So, I think what's resulted in that, you've seen lots of things come out, documents that have come out. The kind of AI blueprint, last year was really helpful in delineating what safeguards, what principles should be here. I think that's useful from a leadership perspective. Lots of implementation work to do, but you got to start with like your guardrails of where you're trying to head. What are your principles? There's been big investments, being made by National Science Foundation. I mean, you can just kind of look at the litany. I think we put out a fact sheet a couple months ago, and it's got a good amount of things that have been accomplished to date. And again, just to reiterate what my role here is the Federal Chief Information Security Officer, working daily with Claire Martirano, the Federal CIO, who's really at the pointing in the spear on our Office of Management and Budget efforts on AI. We're focused on getting good guidance out to agencies for responsible use of AI. And that's something that we want to do with the public. And so you can expect that we will put that out for public comment soon, because we really need the input and we want to build that with the community.
I think in this area, the government has moved at light speed for government. You could argue about whether that's still fast enough or not, but there's no question that when you've seen a lot of these systems come to the fore the last couple of years, to have the government so rapidly responding, even if it's voluntary frameworks, I'm not sure there's a precedent for that in any other area. And I think it tells you about both the potential and the concern here. The good news is that we as the United States hold nearly all the cards in this field, which is really quite remarkable. From the chips design by folks like NVIDIA and AMD, to the big computing platforms like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft and Facebook that have the compute necessary to train these models, to the data scientists that are working on this, almost exclusively, all of that capability resides in the United States. And the one thing that I worry about, and I have a book coming out, I have to plug my book, World on the Brink, available for pre-orders on Amazon. It talks about the challenge of China. And the one thing
How much of it was written by ChatGPT?
Zero, because of error rates.
Should have tried Bard, right?
The one thing I worry is us losing that advantage, right? It is relatively easy for the president to call on the 15 companies, leading companies in AI, and to get them to sign an agreement about the responsible use of AI, because these are American companies, right? If these companies are not Microsoft and Google and ChatGPT, but Baidu and Tencent and Alibaba, that's going to be much more difficult, if not really impossible. And that's why you've seen the administration move in the area of not just focusing on promoting AI technologies and also constraining it where the use can be nefarious, but also making sure that China falls far behind us in their development, particularly by restricting the selling of NVIDIA chips, the A100, the H100 chips to China, restricting sale of semiconductor manufacturing equipment to make sure that they can't make them themselves, even if they could design them. But there's a lot more that needs to be done in that space. You've seen the progress that China announced in the last couple of weeks with the Huawei iPhone that was able to use a digitally manufactured chip at 7 nanometers. That surprised, I think, a lot of people, but really shouldn't have, because the export control policies we have on semiconductor manufacturing equipment is full of holes. And a lot of the equipment that you use for a chip that you make at 28 nanometers could also be used to make a chip less efficiently, but nevertheless make it at 7 nanometers. And that's exactly what the Chinese have done. So we need to do much more to tighten this up to make sure that this critical technology stays in the United States and we continue to be leaders in it.
And I'm glad actually you brought up China, because that is, as anyone you speak to at the Department of Defense will say, the U.S. is pacing threat. That is what they tend to repeat. And I mean, there's been reports just recently about China using AI technologies to run a satellite for 24 hours. So they're clearly using AI at a very breakneck speed. So how can we enable AI and develop AI technologies and be able to compete with China on the world stage? And I know, Dmitri, you already started to answer that question, but just to broaden it out as well, and whoever wants to take that.
Well, I mean, just to kind of build on that and answer that is, I think, I've been heartened so far by the U.S. administration policy and the work going on, which is, I think, striking about the right balance, which is not seeking to stall innovation, but at the same time thinking quite carefully about how to deploy, manage, regulate control the technology in appropriate ways, and I think we're going to continue to see a balance. I mean, I'm for a lot of the reasons Dmitri said, when you look at all of the cards that United States holds in terms of our capability, but not just the technology capability, but the fact that we have that balance between safety and innovation that's going to enable us to compete, but in safe ways. And I think you look at China as a society in terms of how it's going to use this domestically, what constraints, the lack of constraints it has on the data it takes, but the consequences of that, because as we all know, the models learn the behavior of the society, and so what's that going to mean? So I kind of, I'm very, very optimistic of our US capability to innovate for all of those reasons, but we absolutely have to be appropriately paranoid, because we're only going to be able to, to pace this if we stay appropriately paranoid.
Any further thoughts on China? No. Well, to move on to a different topic, I want to ask about data sets and how you can effectively secure AI data sets as they evolve and grow. For example, in healthcare, how can you secure inputs in data sets to ensure the outputs are safe and actionable for patient health and they're not tampered with? And Dmitri, maybe I'll start with you on this.
Yeah, well, obviously you have a big privacy concern anytime you're dealing with sensitive data like healthcare in particular. But this is a problem that is being solved actively. I'm actually an investor in one company called Atropos Health that is focused on, came out of Stanford, that is focused on taking patient data anonymized, but doctors' diagnosis of patient data and feeding it into these learning systems to help doctors diagnose and identify problems early on, based on these huge data sets. So the promise that it holds in a variety of things, whether it's helping doctors diagnose things, helping radiologists identify cancers, developing new drugs, is just absolutely incredible. You got to make sure that the privacy is enforced, and in most of these cases, you don't need to know the name of the person or any identifiable information. You can take the symptoms, match it to the doctor's diagnosis, and feed it into those systems. Obviously you got to be concerned about potential for tampering of the data and poisoning, but frankly, you're dealing with such huge volumes of data here that it's going to be really hard for an adversarial attack to actually dramatically alter it one way or another. So absolutely, you should be building constraints in that. But I'm not as concerned, perhaps, as others about the potential of poisoning attacks when you're dealing with really, really large data sets.
Yeah, well, I mean, right, we are, but I take the point, and also, but there's, to Dimitri's point, there's still like data access concerns that are prevalent, and are going to be repeated here, and it's all the same types of attacks right now, and so I think to go back to, we have secure software development framework. We've been putting a lot on ensuring that secure by design principles are integrated into any software vendor that works with the U.S. government, and like just working towards the contract provisions that require that, and attestation forms and regimes around it, because we're serious about this, and so I think it's a lot of, we do know what needs to be done to protect data sets, and we're going to continue to need to, just with more urgency maybe, push on that. But also some of the other creative things that we've been looking at, we have to understand how this technology is going to enable new types of attacks, and be experimenting with that in a safe way, responsible way, and working with communities that we've always worked with to kind of ensure that we understand new ways that they can be breached. And I think it's just all of these issues around data need to be looked at once.
And one issue that's certain to be impacted by AI technologies is the workforce across many sectors. But the cyber workforce in particular, there's been a huge gap and many open jobs for many years. How do you think the development of AI technologies is going to impact that gap in the cyber workforce, those openings, for better or for worse? Maybe, Phil, we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, we've often commented that when you think about the cybersecurity workforce challenges, and if you I don't really believe some of the big end of the numbers that claims the number of vacancies, but it's certainly true. We have a cybersecurity workforce challenge, both in skills and number of roles and availability of roles across different industries. And I think while we're all doing a lot to train and create more cybersecurity professionals, I think the more meaningful problem to look at in the long term is the productivity of the cybersecurity workforce we've already got. We've got to 10x that. And that is not just to increase the number of people doing useful work, it's to also improve the actual jobs for the people that are doing it, improve the quality of their roles. And so when we look at this, you'll hear us use a couple of phrases. It's about reducing toil. So there's tremendous application of AI, and especially the newer generative AI technologies, where we're already using it to be able to just automate and provide assistance to a whole array of security roles, whether it's security operations, security analysts, intelligence analysts, people that work on secure configuration of software systems, and it just makes their role a lot easier and scalable, and it just generally reduces toil and makes them more productive. The other thing we talk about, you'll hear us use the phrase talent, which is particularly around the democratization of talent. And one of the things that we're definitely seeing, and we're seeing a lot of people find the same thing, which is the use of an AI assistant that is appropriately trained and managed takes somebody that's kind of entry level and gives them an effective kind of skills boost, and it takes somebody that's experienced and has skills and gets them up to an even higher level. So that combination, I think, is not just transformational for all industries, but it especially applies to cyber, in my view, given those workforce challenges.
Trisha, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I fully agree. Or where I think the biggest opportunity is that instead of hiring SQL experts, you can just hire creative people who can get in the mind of the fraudster or the bad actor and try to defend your organization. So the opportunity that it provides for creative work to be done is really immense, and I'm really excited about that.
As the adage goes, that's become a pretty common refrain now. AI will not replace people, right? Or people will not be replaced by AI. They'll be replaced by people using AI. And there's no doubt going to be massive job dislocations across probably nearly every industry out there. But it's not necessarily going to be a net job loss. I think anytime you've seen through history, the Industrial Revolution or automation, the 20th century, you've seen huge changes in how people work and what types of roles are needed. But you've actually seen an expansion of jobs as the economic activity boosted by this productivity increases as well. So I'm pretty optimistic that you're going to see that here, but there's no question that some jobs will disappear and will be replaced by other jobs or people that are more creative and are able to use these tools to much greater effect.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd add that we just put out a national cyber workforce strategy, and we've been talking a lot about, as we go out and implement that, there's a lot of cross opportunities to recruit for AI skill sets, and I think data scientists, there's going to be certain job types. I'm a sort of boring government guy, so position descriptions are important to me because we need to start somewhere and be very clear and standardized about what skill sets we actually need and get that right, and not have people out there kind of searching for that and getting it wrong. So it's blocking and tackling like that. But also it's to Dmitri's point about people using it. There's core jobs in the back end, but there's just the use of and being trained in the use of. That one, I think we can do safely while we learn to do it and don't do it yet with production data and production environments. There's plenty of online trainings becoming available. Certainly in government, we're focused on getting those out and available to federal employees because there's ways to train yourself on the use of these tools without introducing risk into your work environment. And if you think about it, I mean, that's a good way to start to actively provide opportunities and push folks who want to maybe rebrand themselves as an AI expert to do that in a safe manner. So we're trying to just kind of be practical like we always are and build it while we move.
Well, with that, we're going to wrap up the panel. I think it's been a great discussion about a variety of AI topics and risks, and I want to thank all 4 of you for being here today. I have no doubt in the next year we're going to see a continued evolution in this space and probably be back up here discussing similar but different topics next year. So thank you to all for being here today, and that is it for the keynotes. So have a great afternoon. Thanks.